Um, well, there's been an enormous discussion about inequality in the SDGs. This the fact that the MDGs did not include inequality was really one of the major two or three top issues that for which the MDGs were criticized. So this time round, with the SDGs, you would think that the inequality issue would be like the top priority uh, for inclusion, but surprisingly, they were not. There's been this huge discussion about whether inequality should be a goal by itself, whether it should be part of other goals, whether you can measure inequality, how do you set a target, and so forth. And all of that has been very disappointing, that there has been so much doubt about whether you should have a goal on inequality when in fact it was so clear that there was so much dissatisfaction from the part of so many different groups about the MDGs not having inequality as a goal or a target. And I think unless it is a particular goal by itself, it doesn't do any good, because in my mind, global goals are not just things that you measure, they are an expression of what is important. It's what I would call a normative goal, how the world should look like. And so if it doesn't get to the top list of the goals, then I don't think it's worth it. Because after all, with these, I think there are now 17 goals that have been proposed, and each one of them will have several targets, and each target will have several indicators, and you can imagine just by multiplication how many indicators there would be. So just having some kind of a disaggregated indicator on access to water in a country, whether in a rural area or urban area, that's easily forgettable, and that's going to be forgotten. So it has to be a goal. And from that point of view, I'm very worried that the inequality goal is kind of hanging on there. The second point I'd like to make is that inequality exists in many different ways, and there is inequality, for one thing, within countries and between countries. And I think that one of the things that keeps on getting forgotten in these discussions about global priorities is the problem of inequality between countries. And this relates to the fact that you have unfair rules of global governance, unfair rules of trade, investment, and so forth, that are pitched against developing countries, and where the rules are made by the most powerful voices. So we know, for example, the trade rules in the area of agriculture is extremely unfair to developing countries, and that developing countries have much less voice than developed countries. This is, of course, changing with the rise of China, Brazil, and India in these negotiations. But nonetheless, the US comes with an army of lawyers and economists into these negotiations, and it's much harder for the developing countries to have their voices heard. So the thing that worries me is the fact that inequality between countries is not emphasized, or is often neglected. And inequality between countries is particularly important because it reflects the unfair rules that govern the global economy. And we know that unfair rules are made basically because of political power, that powerful countries like the United States and those in the European Union have the economic and other resources, professional or technical resources, to negotiate, more forcefully often in making these rules. So I think it is very important to make sure that if we're going to have globalization that is fair and inclusive, that the rules are democratically formulated. And democratic means that you have to give voice to the less powerful countries as well. And so inequality between countries, I think, is really an important issue. And that relates also to the whole issue of global governance that is not adequately attended to the list of 17 global goals. That the global governance tends to be forgotten in favor of national governance. And it relates to the point that we keep on blaming developing countries for the fact that they're not making enough progress. That is definitely an important consideration that we need to make sure to point to the responsibility of governments, of course. But the fact that the overall context of the global economy is such that developing countries can find themselves constantly at a disadvantage, I think is something that nobody will disagree with either. Well, I have a sort of a love-hate relationship with global goals because I see that they are incredibly powerful in motivating people to care about things that we all care about, like putting every child in school, like making sure that everybody has clean water, that no child is dying prematurely just because they cannot have access to basic medical care, or that because they have no access to water. So goals can have this enormously motivating effect, but I think they're also extremely dangerous, and the more I have thought about them and the more everybody has become completely somehow bedazzled and seduced by global goals, I have come to feel that they're extremely dangerous, because the problem is that global goals shine a light on an important priority, but as my colleague Alicia Yeaman says, they also cast a light on everything that has not been picked up as a global goal. So the problem with global goals is that they are reductionist, they simplify, and if you take them too seriously as an agenda, as a real development agenda with priorities, then it means that you have somehow confused a set of kind of like mobilizing slogans, or maybe monitoring indicators for priority agendas. And these two things are very different. Priority agendas are set by considering where the biggest problems are, what the effective means to solve these problems are, by weighing all the competing priorities, by thinking carefully about evidence of what works, what doesn't work, and all of this is not all amenable to quantitative analysis and quantitative expression. And so global goals privilege things that you can count, and as I think it's the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights says, do we cherish what we count, or do we value what we cherish? And unfortunately, global goals somehow play a trick in our minds to make us cherish what we can count and value them, rather than use these numbers for the purposes that they can be useful for, which is just basically kind of tracking how well we are progressing. Well, the alternative, we never had, we didn't have global goals the way we do now. We had specific goals, which were like campaigns. And what was interesting was that in the 1980s and 90s, people like Jim Grant of UNICEF had these like child immunization goals, and he was very effective in pushing his agenda. But these goals that were set in these global conferences very specifically said that these were global goals, and that national governments may wish to adapt them to national realities. We all know that context matters, and that what is a priority and what is a way of solving problems in rural Malawi is not the same as what you do in urban Delhi. And so you need to have a more of a bottom-up approach to setting goals and setting strategies and action plans and agendas. And so the alternative, actually, I mean, at this point, I would say do away with global goals, do away with this huge sort of infrastructure of indicators and all of that, and make privilege the local as far as these actions are concerned. And I think global actions should be much more oriented to global policies, to removing the unfairness in the global economy.